Coming up, Week 18 looms for Big Blue, but most importantly, draft stock. What can happen in the final week of the season to put Big Blue in a position to take whatever quarterback they want? We dive in next. Yes, my friends, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your hosts over here, Adam Armbrecht over there, the healthy, wealthy, and wise Andrew Makowitz, as we prepare for the final week of the NFL season that is jam-packed with implications for the New York Football Giants beyond this year.
It's crazy to think about. We obviously there's the draft and where the Giants will finish. We could talk a little bit about that. Depending on where they finish, there could be big sweeping changes in terms of what they want to do at the quarterback position. And also, Josina Anderson has come out with some vague reports talking about
Oh, yeah.
big changes coming to an NFC East team. It could be personnel, it could be coaching staff, it could be front office. There's so many different things that are going on in the next few days. And also the Giants have a football game against one of their division rivals coming up on Sunday.
Yeah, and you've heard Sirianni, who said we just got to get ourselves kind of right. We got to get out of this rut that we're in. Which, listen, maybe the Giants are exactly the team you want to play in that scenario. The other side of that coin is like division rivalries sometimes bring out the best in all teams, and maybe that'll be a bad sign for the Eagles, but also a bad sign for the New York Football Giants if they're looking to get up there in the draft, if they're looking to secure potentially the highest possible pick and the second pick overall, obviously, with Chicago being locked in there at number one as Carolina finally fell off the table officially. So there's a lot. There's a lot of implications here. And in the end, for the Giants, when we talk about this week 18, we know that we're going to have a couple of things at play here. So when we look over on Tankathon, we understand, as I said, the Carolina Panthers finally lost enough games to put Chicago in a spot where they can do whatever they want. The Commanders, who will take on the Cowboys to end their season, the Patriots, who will take on the Jets, and the Cardinals, who will take on the Seahawks, are all there at 2, 3, and 4 ahead of the New York Football Giants. The other side of this, too, is obviously strength of schedule, which is the first tiebreaker coming out of this, but it's going to get impacted at least marginally by this week 18. The Giants, I guess when you look at these, Andy, are going to have the second probably strongest strength of schedule impact here, right? Cowboys will be the highest ranked one. Jets will be off there. Seattle will be down a little bit lower. But are you concerned about when you just look at this schedule here of saying, or are you optimistic that, hey, the Giants lose, there's a lot of opportunities for other losses to happen ahead of them?
Yeah, it's a little tough because at first it seemed pretty simple. Like the Giants have the easiest strength of schedule, which if they end up in a tiebreaker means that they are the worst team, which is a little bit of a different way of thinking about it. Usually it's like the harder strength of schedule gets you into the playoffs or whatever it's going to be. Where like,
Right.
no, you had the easiest schedule and you were still the worst team. The issue for the Giants is that they've played all three of those teams, the Patriots, the Cardinals, and the Commanders, and have beaten all of those teams, right?
Yeah.
And so the issue for the Giants is now the Giants are hoping for those teams to get wins, but if those teams get wins at them, it kind of messes with the Giants' strength of schedule and makes them look to or appear to be a little bit more formidable.
Right.
It's this whole like weird convoluted thing. I saw Art Stapleton, one of the beat writers for NJ.com. He was like, if you really care, look at this AFC team versus this game to like slightly bump one number here. It's really convoluted, Adam. I think the simple thing is if the Giants lose, they can be no worse than fifth, and they have an opportunity to move up to the second spot.
Yeah, Washington, just to clarify, at 515 win per strength of schedule, excuse me, right now, 518 for the New England Patriots, 562 for the Arizona Cardinals, 511 for the New York Giants. Just behind them, by the way, the Chargers at 526 and Tennessee at 529. Those teams also have 5 wins as well. So there is this weird world where, say some teams win, other teams lose, and blah, blah, blah. The Giants could find themselves in an interesting situation. But the Arizona Cardinals becomes an easier climb here. But to your point, it's like it's all marginal. And then the win or the loss is what really impacts it. My big relief was that the Giants have beaten all those teams, and then they could all have the same record, and it wouldn't matter that they've beaten them head to head. Technically, if the strength of schedule shakes out the right way, that's a secondary tiebreaker, which could be sweet. But again, it's all about the games in front of everybody first.
Do you want me to blow your mind even further, Adam?
Oh,
Just
please.
one more thing when we talk about strength of schedule, we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
The Commanders are playing the Cowboys, the Seahawks are playing the Cardinals, and the Jets are playing the Patriots.
Yeah.
It's like the Giants have played all of those teams. So whether one wins or loses, how does their strength of schedule change?
Oh. All right. Well, we can't get into that right now. But what we can
It
do.
puts your mind in a pretzel. It literally puts you, because like a win by Dallas and a loss by the Commanders is also the same as the other way, because it hurts one but helps the other in terms of the win losses. So Adam, you can really like go nuts on this one if you wanted to. I just think the simplest way to think about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
yeah. So it doesn't matter. Here's okay. So now we can move on from this, because here's why. After all of that, because ultimately the Giants are probably, I'm going to say, not going to get up to the second overall pick, right? They're not probably even going to get to the third overall pick. Maybe, just maybe they get to that fourth one in some form or fashion, because that strength of schedule with Arizona is there's a bigger gap there to maybe climb. Okay, great. But if they don't, and if they have to make a move, and if there's this rumor, as you said, from Josina Anderson, as vague as you could possibly be about big changes coming, it could come down to what is the Giants' opportunity here? And who are they looking at when we talk about the draft? You can go by a lot of different metrics, obviously, or a lot of different outlets. When we look over on Tankathon, which gives you obviously the rankings of where we currently stand, boy, no one would love to hear the fact that they have it right now. Caleb Williams 1, Drake May 2, Jaden Daniels 3 to the New England Patriots. And they have Drake May going obviously into Washington. Marvin Harrison Jr. will go to the Arizona Cardinals at number 4. And then they do have the Giants taking the Penn State offensive tackle, Fashanu. So, yes, you get a player of need. But is quarterback the most important? And do you need to go get that guy? And what does the price point end up being to move 1, 2, or 3 spots up the board?
yeah. I mean, we talk about that a lot. We talk about the idea of what it will
Nay, 4
take to.
spots up the board if you think that the Chicago Bears love Justin Fields now, and they're back, they're back in full bloom love with their own quarterback.
Right. We've mentioned that there's the possibility of like, okay, well, if they know they're going to take Caleb Williams and Justin Fields is on the board, what does it cost? Most people are
Right.
saying around the league it's a third or a second round pick to be able to get Justin Fields. But if they decide that Justin Fields is their guy and they hold up the number one pick to have whichever of the quarterbacks that you prefer, it's going to be a king's ransom.
Yeah.
The problem and what everyone's been talking about is, are there players that are on the untouchable list for the Giants that you would not move while sending draft capital to the Bears to go get that quarterback? Is there a short list? Is there a larger list? Is there no list for you, Adam? Like, where do you stand on moving up to number one, and who you'd be comfortable putting in there?
Yeah, because out of the 2 options, you can pile a bunch of draft picks and throw it at it to get up the board, but understanding how many holes the Giants have and the needs that they have to fill across this roster, they can do it through free agency, but the draft is critical, right? The draft is critical to forming your young base, your young low-cost assets. So if you don't want to spend extra draft capital, you start to say, well, maybe we'll throw a player your way. This is tricky for me because originally I looked at it and said, listen, you can name a lot of guys on this team that I would say, okay, does he get me? And by the way, does he get me to number 1? Does he get me to number 1 and Caleb Williams? That's the guy, let's say, right? We all circle him. That's the player that is a head and shoulders above everybody else, if you believe that. To go and make that move and say it cost you your 5th overall pick and Kayvon Thibodeau. That's the starting point. And you give the Bears defense a really strong anchor. I was surprised to find myself saying, yeah, I would probably consider that because, yes, Kayvon Thibodeau looks like he is on the edge of really becoming one of those strong players. But what are the chances that I feel more confident I can find another one of those guys somewhere, whether it's in the first round or even second round and third round, right? Like those prospects are a little bit easier to come by. There are other players on the defense. By the way, I'd be more than willing to give up like a Darnay Holmes. I could throw him in there, no problem. I can throw in, but
Adoree
Xavier
Jackson?
McKinney. What's the conversation going to be around his contract this offseason? Is there a sign and trade possibility there to put a high talent, never missed a single snap this season into the secondary for the Chicago Bears? I had a harder time finding players I wouldn't trade than maybe guys that I would. Is there anybody defensively first that you would not put in the mix here? I left out a high profile name for you to discuss,
No, there isn't. Because and
including
it's
Dexter
because
Lawrence,
while I
including Big Sexy.
well, because listen, the thing for me is I don't believe that trading up has been fruitful recently. Given you look at what the Carolina Panthers did to go get Bryce Young, that looks like a massive mistake considering they now gave away the number one pick. They don't
Sure.
know if the quarterback is the right quarterback. They gave away their number one wide receiver in DJ Moore, and they're further away than they were if they would have just stood pat at like the eighth pick, right? You look at the San Francisco 49ers. They overcame giving up multiple first round picks to move up and get Trey Lance. And guess what? 2 years later, he's not even on the roster. Like, imagine
Yeah.
what they could do with all of that draft capital. So, in the philosophical sense, I would not move up the draft board to go get whatever quarterback that I'd want because it feels too risky. However, in this scenario, if we are committed and say that the number one pick is what we want and that this franchise quarterback can change things, and Joe Schoen, Dayball, front office, everyone is all on board with it, then really like the only person on the entire roster is Andrew Thomas because it feels like getting a foundational left tackle is one of the hardest, if not the hardest thing outside of getting a franchise quarterback. While I love Dexter Lawrence, he doesn't play a premium enough position where you'd say, to give up that franchise quarterback, I will not give up Dexter Lawrence.
Yeah, Dexter Lawrence. I thought about, and I'm not saying he'd be on the Untouchables. Bobby Okereke all of a sudden popped into my mind. I'm like, well, here's the guy that just stabilized this linebacking core, something we haven't had since Antonio Pierce. But is that irreplaceable? He has 3 more years on his contract. 3 years from now, will we say, oh, thank goodness we didn't go get Caleb Williams because we have Bobby Okereke as he approaches 30 years old and his next contract comes up? You did bring up one interesting note there about philosophically, I would not do this. I would not sacrifice. I don't believe. I don't believe in it. I don't love the idea of giving up a bunch of draft picks to move up the board. I also don't love the idea of giving up a bunch of players. You mentioned they gave up more. Chicago now has a player on in their wide receiver core that has been insanely good. He's actually created a different narrative now around Justin Field and helped to maybe change the perception there and make it so Chicago says, we have 2 picks in the top 10. Let's have a discussion. What are we thinking about doing here? So that's the hard part for me. The commitment of saying if the organization believes in this quarterback and scouts him and says, no, this is a guy of the caliber of X, right? Of the Patrick Mahomes of the world. Then I think you feel comfortable saying, yep, okay, we're committed to it. Let's go do it, whatever it takes, and we'll live with those results. Coming up here in a second, though, I do want to talk about the other side of it of, well, what if you stand pat, right? What if you just want to sit there and wait and see what happens? Or what if you just want to move one position up the board? Is there a price point here? And is there anything that influences the way you think about the quarterback position, including having guys like Cam Ward declare for the draft someone that is not going to be in the top 10, but maybe represents the type of player that the Giants, that a QB guru like Dable says, oh, yes, I certainly could turn him into a Pro Bowl caliber QB for Big Blue. We'll get to that in just 1 second. But the other thing you need to remember, guys, is that we're talking about, I don't know, checking in on your vision, understanding if you have a security around your organization to feel confident about making those type of big moves. And that's where you have to think about going to our friends over at Personam, because Personam is the type of company that improves your vision and looks into your network security environment and allows you to see cyber threats that other tools and platforms simply cannot do. Personam is always vigilant, always learning. Go to personam.com today to learn more. So the other side of this is like, don't do anything. And this is what I find fascinating, Andy. Bowl season is concluding. It's all bells and whistles. You see the Heisman gets handed out a couple of weeks ago. And all of these players, and you talked about this like midway through the year too, when it was, should the Giants be tanking and what does it mean, winning bad games, et cetera. And then we're also, by the way, going to get to a little information about Sunday and who should be playing for the Giants. But you mentioned how it's like, well, we just don't know yet, right? We're weeks away from knowing what is the QB hierarchy. Does another player come up on the board? All that stuff. when Cam Ward declared for the draft out of Washington State, all of a sudden, you start to hear this buzz around Giants of like, oh, well, maybe he's a guy that would have been thought about as a mid to late round draft pick originally. Now he's thought to be able to go as high as the second round potentially. And everyone starts to have this little chatter and buzz about him. And for me, someone who is not, I follow college football. When? In the offseason, when I'm looking at all the players and reviewing their tape and seeing who's going to matter for the Giants. But to have a name like that come out of nowhere, essentially, in week 17 of the NFL season, this is what always gives me pause about you have to go get your quarterback. You have to trade the assets. You have to trade the players. Go get your guy. Because all of a sudden everyone goes, oh, well, maybe we could just turn this guy into him. We have a great QB expert as our head coach and Brian Dable. Why would we go spend? This is always the discussion to me that matters more than moving up the board and also dismissing offensive line and other areas of need high in the draft class.
Could you imagine, Adam, if the first 4 picks are all quarterbacks and the Giants are sitting in there at 5 and they're like, well, we have a late round grade on JJ McCarthy, but let's just take him here.
Yeah.
It instead of drafting Marvin Harrison Jr., who's considered like a game changing franchise level
Right.
wide receiver that you need. I mean, to me, I said philosophically, I don't believe in trading a war chest to move up a handful of picks. I prefer trading back. I know that you are the king of the trade back simulator to see how many picks you can accumulate like a squirrel
Oh,
in the
baby.
wintertime, getting as many acorns as he can in the tree.
My
Uh,
cheeks could get so wide on draft day, you wouldn't believe it.
4th round pick, 6th round pick, 2nd round pick, just like
That's right.
all up in there, right? But I believe that patience and believing in your scouting and thinking that you can get something later is important. And you're exactly right. Cam Ward is one of those guys you kind of heard of. He's probably going to be like a 3rd round pick. Then you have Michael Penix, who all of a sudden went from probably a 2nd round pick. All of a sudden, people saying, should the Giants take him with the 5th pick after he played an amazing game? You have JJ McCarthy, who's in the national championship game, 5-star recruit, has played awesome at Michigan. He's going to be available in the late 1st round. To me, it just feels like this seems like a draft where everyone's going to want to move up for the generational quote unquote Caleb Williams.
Right.
And the Giants using a little bit of patience and saying, let's go like fill some other areas of need and maybe trading back into the 1st round in one of the last picks to get their 2nd round guy is a more prudent way to do this, especially knowing, and this is going to sound crazy, but especially knowing that we're only like 6 or 7 games from when the Giants handed Daniel Jones $150+ million contract, right?
Right.
So there's only been a handful of games that Daniel Jones played, albeit horrible games for him,
Sure.
that like he's still on the roster. So why not improve the rest of the roster, trade up, get your quarterback potentially of the future, and not mortgage 4 first-round picks, Dexter Lawrence, and something else to go get Caleb Williams.
And one other thing that I think plays into kind of what you're talking about too is because you and I had also had the discussion throughout the year of, well, let's say you end up with Caleb, say the Giants got the 1st overall pick by whatever means, and they get Caleb Williams. And you had said, if Daniel Jones is healthy, he's starting week 1 next year because you're not going to throw your rookie QB into the fire. And I was a little taken aback by just the idea of, I was like, well, if you're taking a top 5 QB, you play him. Now, Carolina gives you an example of maybe not a great team at this point and damaging the young quarterback. Then you look at a place like Houston and you go, well, oh, there's the really good version of the way things can go. But I also think, and this would not be the reason that you make the choice, but if you are patient, if you do trade back, if you do end up then coming into that 1st round to have the 5th year option on your rookie QB, it is also perceptually different to take a quarterback in the top 5 and what it means in the start of his rookie year versus taking a guy at the back end of the 1st round. Now, I think in either scenario, when the guy is ready, he's ready, but you'd have less pressure, I think, organizationally to say, we got into the 1st round, we took our quarterback that we really like, and also we did that because we get the 5th year. We did that because we want to have the full 1st season to develop him, to maybe allow, sadly, Daniel Jones to take a few more body blows so that we can still make sure the offensive line is ready, make sure we've improved the team around him, right?
I have a question for you that kind of circles all of this, and then we can move to the Week 18 question that we have.
Oh,
the
baby.
The thing that I keep thinking about too is do do you think that Joe Schoen and the brain trust that is going to be making this selection is thinking about the perception around the decision that they're making, where they just gave their quote unquote franchise quarterback $160 million, and that drafting or trading 3 first-round picks to move up, trading Dexter Lawrence, who's a potential all pro, to trade up and get another quarterback is signifying that they just completely whiffed on that pick. Like, should they care about that? Does that factor in at all, do you think, in their decision making process?
I don't. My short answer is no, because I don't think you can be a GM, or maybe making these decisions and say, well, perceptually, people will say, does that mean you made a mistake on Daniel Jones? Like, I don't care, because if I'm worried about how people think about a mistake that I maybe made, I'm probably not going to make the right decision going forward here. That being said, it is going to look like something perceptually. Like, if you move up to get the guy, then it is the acknowledgement we made a mistake. And then it's also the acknowledgement. Okay, so worst case scenario, after the upcoming season, Daniel Jones will effectively be gone. The weird part about it is, I think, if I go into those waters, is that it's telling everybody that you made a massive mistake with Daniel Jones, but also telling them, don't worry. It's only one season. That's why I gave him the contract structured the way that it was. So after 2 years, I can be done with it. It was both a big mistake, but also something we'll all forget about in another 18 games. And that's a little, so there is something there to that you can kind of be selling the fan base. I made the mistake, but look how quickly I course corrected.
Well, I mean, just know Rosen in the top 10 were a terrible, terrible team, had the number one overall pick and said, we're going to take Kyler Murray and we're just going to ship Josh Rosen out for a bag of balls. And so, like, a little bit of a different scenario, because when you bring in a rookie, you never know what you're going to get. The Giants had a year of watching Daniel Jones and then committed to him. But it
Well, yeah,
still
yes.
begs the,
By the way,
shows that,
let's be very clear. The level of this mistake is fairly egregious for Joe Schoen and the Giants, right? Because to your point, it wasn't, well, we got Josh Rosen. We realized, oof, this is not the guy we need. And we see Kyler Murray and he's going to be better and everything else. And we make the move and boom, mistake acknowledged, correction made. This is like, we came in the door. There were a lot of evidence to suggest maybe this is not the right guy. They said, we don't even think he is. We're not going to pick up the 5th year. Then they get a sample size. They say, maybe he is. Okay, we're going to commit to him. And then another year later say, on second thought, the thought that I thought is not actually the thought that I think now, right? So there is a lot there's a lot surrounding Joe Schoen and how we think about him as the Giants GM, just specifically around this one thing. There's a lot of other moves, free agent signings, draft decisions, hits and misses that every GM has. But the Daniel Jones situation certainly has made it a very highly focused discussion point around Joe Schoen and what his tenure as a Giants GM is going to be. Now, speaking of Giants QBs, we are going to talk about the upcoming game and Tommy DeVito and also Tyrod Taylor and the decision around the QB position. But I'm sure that Joe Schoen is sitting there and thinking, gosh, I've made a lot of decisions. Some good, some bad. And I'm a little bit concerned about my well-being. And that's why I can go over to Potential, because Potential is going to be a platform that allows you to go ahead and take an online assessment, basically a survey that benchmarks and tracks your well-being and gives you coaching to improve it. Coaching for Joe Schoen, coaching for Brian Dable, and it also tracks your progress over time, something that everyone's doing from the outside looking in. It's also completely free for individual users. You can check it all out at Potential.com. That's Pietential.com. But Tommy DeVito. Oh, this little can-do attitude. This little engine that could. The only Giants QB capable of winning football games, quite frankly. When you go into week 18, Andy, and you think about everything that's going on here, I'll give you the quote from Brian Dable around what they expect coming into this and why the decision about making sure you do everything possible to have the highest possible draft pick could be a little bit trickier than we perceive. First, Brian Dable said, you have to understand they're professionals, referring to his players. Everybody has a job to do in this league. You try to do it as good as you can, try to prepare, take a lot of pride in your work, put a lot of time into it. We haven't gotten the results we want, but we certainly talk about competing and finishing and being good teammates. What does that say to you when you walk into the final game where the difference between getting the 4th, the 3rd, the 2nd overall pick or the 5th or worse could come down to choosing to start Tyrod Taylor or start Tommy DeVito?
well, listen, I think whatever decision they make, they're pretty much going to say the same things because that's what they have to do. They have to say, we got to evaluate the entire roster. This gives us the best chance to do that. They're not going to come out and say, we don't want to win this game. Tyrod's not going to be here next year. Tommy DeVito's under contract. Let's roll the dice with him while also hurting our chances to beat the Philadelphia Eagles. Like you can't be very honest. You have to say the same thing whether you're starting Tyrod or Tommy DeVito. The
True.
the question that I have is like almost why start Tyrod Taylor, right? If you know almost for certain that he's not going to be on this roster next season, which I don't believe he's going to be. The Giants clearly have to reshape this entire quarterback room. Why start him? Does he give you the best chance to beat the Eagles, Adam? And is that the best thing for the organization going into this game?
Well, the tricky part of it is if you go by the stats, you would say that Tommy DeVito is the quarterback you can't start because he's won football games. Tyrod Taylor loses football games when he plays for the New York Football Giants. Now, the reality of when you watch the games, you can see that Tyrod Taylor is the better quarterback and he does give you the best chance to win. I don't the problem here is no matter who you start, you're battling something. Tyrod Taylor starts, he gives you a better chance to win. He's also trying to prove that he's capable of still being a serviceable backup and go get himself his next contract somewhere else. But if you put in Tommy DeVito, like one thing that we've seen in the games that he played, he does a pretty good job sensing pressure in the pocket and knows when to run. You can't control that element of it, right? So you can game script in a way where it's like, all right, we're going to do a lot of handoffs here, but you can't just not let him throw the ball at all over the course of the game. You still want to put a good taste in the mouths of fans around Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt, even Daniel Bellinger, who's had a couple of better games here down the stretch of the season. So he's going to throw a few passes, and then a play breaks down. And all of a sudden, Tommy DeVito scrambles for 25 yards, something that Tyrod Taylor can do as well. But unless you believe in the old, well, the NFL script is right on schedule, you can't control these things that are uncontrollable. Saquon Barkley breaks off an 85-yard touchdown run, right? Like you can't control these things. So Shai is sitting down several key players and taking those moments off the board. I don't know if you can dictate the outcome. And by the way, the Giants have 5 wins on the year. So the good news is, even if you play all of the players, they are more likely to lose than win. So there is some mitigation of risk here because they're not a good enough team to win these games.
But the question that I go back to that I just want you to answer is this. Your life is on the line,
Sure.
and the Giants have to win the game. They have to win the game.
Oh, I thought you meant
They have
they
to
have to
win.
lose.
What quarterback are you starting?
Why? I guess Tommy. I guess Tyrod Taylor, but he hasn't won the games that he's played in.
But again, so if that's the logical thinking that you're saying, like if my life was on the line, I think Tyrod Taylor gives me a better chance of surviving. Like then conversely, you'd be saying Tommy DeVito gives us a better chance of losing.
I guess. I mean, I'll ask you a better question. I think. Do you start Saquon Barkley and play him, or do you play Eric Gray?
I think you have to play Saquon Barkley
Why?
at least for a little bit.
So
Home
why?
crowd, just in case this is the last game that he plays for the New York Football Giants,
Well,
he has to be
okay,
out.
hold on. Saquon Barkley clearly, it means more symbolically, it means more than Tyrod Taylor does to the Giants, right? But we're talking about last potential games played as a New York Football Giant. So Tyrod Taylor is deserving of the final game as a New York Giant as the starting quarterback. But Saquon, like they're on the same level. Like you start both. So you're doing the send off in the final game of the season. Anyone who could be playing in their last game, Sterling Shepard should start then, and you should sit down Jalen Hyatt because Jalen Hyatt's not going anywhere. He's a part of this team. But this could be Sterling Shepard's last game as a Giant as well.
Sterling Shepard should get some reps out there. He should catch a pass. Everyone should cheer because Jalen Hyatt gives the team a better chance to win. He should be out there, but he should be splitting some snaps. Saquon Barkley needs to be out there, kissing babies, waving his hands, maybe scoring a touchdown, giving everyone all the feels. Like that. That is how this should go because it's not about winning the game. It's about things that are around the game. It's about developing players, giving send offs, getting the right draft picks. It's about everything else outside of the X's and O's for me.
So then shouldn't then maybe my last question would be then, and we'll talk about this more in our game preview, but this is really about the draft stock and everything else. But then So then Jalen Hyatt, though, like, should barely play because why risk Jalen Hyatt getting injured in the final game of the season and impacting the offseason, impacting next year? Wandale Robinson, who's had some injury concerns, like, why over risk him? Daniel Bellinger, like, why over risk him? Like, I mean, like, I get your point about it. It's like, hey, send off for some of the symbolic giants on this roster potentially. That I do. I get it. I agree with it. But Bobby Okereke, he's not going anywhere. We should maybe safeguard Dexter Lawrence. We should be safeguarding Kayvon Thibodeau. We should be safeguarding, right? Azeez Ojulari, maybe you leave him out there because he's in a different waters. But I guess that's, you know what I mean? It's like, how do you serve all the agendas, basically? How do you serve all the agendas of we want to go out and compete? Everybody takes pride in the game. We also don't want to risk maybe winning this game. And we've seen this before, too. It's like then all of a sudden you put in backups and they go, oh, my time. This is my time now. Watch what I go do, right? So there's no way around it, I think, is ultimately what we come to. And that's why, like, whoever you start, Tommy DeVito or Tyrod Taylor, Saquon Barkley, Eric Gray, any of the choices you make, I'm just going to go ahead and say, yeah, it's the right thing to do because you can't predict the outcome because who knows, right? Some young plucky player like Eric Gray. All of a sudden, Eric Gray comes in and goes, I'm a young running back. I want to prove that I have a role on this team, especially Saquon's going to be gone. I go off. The Eagles defense is terrible against the run. Maybe I go off for 100 yards and I show you something, and all of a sudden the Giants win the game, right? You can't control these things.
You can't. It is true. Like Tommy DeVito gets in there. He's like, this might be my last opportunity to ever throw a football in like a
I have off the
game.
field endorsements I need to fulfill. Yeah.
And if I, I already have Rayos, I want some kind of shredded Parmesan, thing to go with it. I
Parmesan
got to
for
throw
life.
3 touchdowns in this
Yeah.
game. I agree with you. I think it's a case by case basis. Like for Sterling Shepard, I think clearly it's kind of the end of the road, and it would be nice for him to get a little bit of a send off. I
Yeah.
think Jalen Hyatt has to play though because I don't know, Adam, is he looking to score his 9th touchdown or his 10th touchdown of the year in this game?
That is a bit of a different thing, too. He doesn't have any of those.
He
And I
has
think it
0. He has
would be
0 touchdowns.
nice if he
It
got one.
kind of would be nice to see him get in the end zone one time before we anoint him as like the next guy up for us. So like there are these little anecdotal things that probably aren't important in the grand scheme of things, but seeing Sterling Shepard catch a pass, Jalen Hyatt up top for a touchdown, Saquon Barkley at least, giving the crowd one more thing to be excited about. Those are things that I feel are necessary for all Giant fans to kind of cope with how terrible this season has gone. But to your point, in the grand scheme, it doesn't really matter, does it?
One thing, honestly, it doesn't. Well, it's all going to play out how it does on the field. And one thing we'll discuss before we get to our game preview on Friday will be how many players aren't here next year. Because there's a lot of names on this roster and a lot of high profile guys that may not be a part of this team. Before we get out the door, just one last note here. It came care of Tommy over on Twitter. Tommy's Takes. He does a good job covering the Giants and having some fun with him. We've interacted a few times. He did mention the Giants GM, Joe Schoen, worked for 4 years under Bills GM, obviously, Brendan Beane. He credited Beane with his success, even saying Beane is the best thing that ever happened to me. During the course of their 4-year tenure together, Beane executed 34 trades, 13 during the draft alone, and 5 trades involving QBs. So, in all of this conversation about how the Giants get up high and what they're going to do this offseason and needing to rebuild that QB room, expect Joe Schoen not to be timid around making those choices. It will come down to whether or not those choices are the correct ones along the way. In the meantime, guys, you get over to YouTube at One Giant Podcast, over on Twitter at One Giant Podcast, at AndyMac214, at Adam Armbrecht, and on the podcast feed. And we will go ahead and continue to break this down, look at that final game over the weekend. We'll even take a look around the league, too, because there's still some implications for final playoff positioning. A lot of NFC teams are in win and get in type scenarios. So we'll rack those all up in a tiny little bow here at the end of the week. But until next time, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, nay, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.